Almost lost in the political fracas over Medicaid expansion in Arizona is Governor Jan Brewer's proposal to simplify the sales tax system. Getting there, however, has been anything but simple.
I've had so many meetings with the cities and stakeholders on this bill, and we've really conceded a lot to the cities. They had some legitimate concerns, and I believe we addressed them.
What's it all about, including the resistance of the state's cities and towns? It's coming up on Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.
Once again, your moderator, Michael Chihar.
The legislative session grinds on, well past the adjournment target. A state budget and two big policy issues are the holdups. Here's a look at the issues: sales tax reform and Medicaid. First, Medicaid, updated for us by the Arizona Republic's Mary Kay Reinhart. Welcome, Mary Kay.
Hi there.
The Senate passed a budget including Medicaid expansion 2 weeks ago. Since then, no public action in the House. Will we see action next week?
It's a great question. It's the one on everyone's mind, and I don't think we know. We hope that we'll see some action, a package of budget bills, including Medicaid expansion, hopefully moving through either the House Appropriations Committee or perhaps the House Health Committee, depending on what their strategy is over there. And there is just a lot of behind closed doors meetings right now to try to figure out what form Medicaid expansion legislation will take and how it will differ from what was sent over by the Senate 2 weeks ago.
So this week, a lot of closed door meetings, as you suggest. What kind of an impact on the final product are those meetings bound to have?
Well, it's a good question, and I think we'll find out hopefully in the next week or two. I think most folks are thinking this will drag on at least a couple of more weeks. As you recall, a couple of weeks ago when the Senate sent over their package, it included the Medicaid expansion. It included some additional funding, about $35 million worth in the budget for the next fiscal year. The Speaker of the House wasn't involved in the crafting of that budget and the expansion proposal. That was primarily Governor Brewer's Medicaid expansion plan that the Senate passed. The Speaker, Speaker Tobin, has put forth a couple of weeks ago his own package of bills to expand Medicaid, put it on the ballot, right? And also require a lot of other pieces that had not really heretofore been debated. And so I think what's happening behind closed doors between the governor's office, the speaker, members in the House, groups like the hospitals, the business community, other supporters that have backed the governor's proposal for these many months, are trying to figure out what pieces of Tobin's proposal, and there are a lot of pieces there, can be put onto the governor's expansion package to make everyone happy, at least happy enough to get it passed by the Senate, passed by the House, sent back over to the Senate for their approval, and then onto the governor's desk. But what form, there are a couple of things in there that I think we'll see more accountability for hospitals in terms of how do we know you're not going to just keep passing on those hidden healthcare costs that we keep hearing about to the insured and to privately insured folks. And how do we know exactly how much uncompensated care you've even got and how much that's going to be reduced if we go ahead and expand Medicaid and a whole ton of money flows in, and presumably hospitals are going to be caring for fewer uninsured people. So there's a lot of pieces already in Andy Tobin's plan that may get attached to the Medicaid expansion package that was sent over a couple weeks ago.
What about his proposal to put it on the ballot? Last week, everybody was saying that was dead. Has there been a resurrection of that at all?
Not formally, but everybody was saying it was dead, and the Speaker himself was conceding that his idea to refer this whole thing to voters at a special election, which could be as early as November, put it in the Constitution, because it would have to be a constitutional amendment under Tobin's proposal. He was saying he thought that was dead. There wasn't a lot of support for that in his own caucus. The governor was saying no way, not happening. since then, there's been a pretty well-publicized effort that's underway now on the part of a couple of former conservative state lawmakers, Senator Antonori from down in your neck of the woods and Senator Gould from Lake Havasu, as well as the chair of this effort is Carolyn Bowerman also from Southern Arizona, and they have formed a political action committee, and as soon as, if and when this Medicaid expansion plan passes in some form or another, as soon as the governor signs it, 90 days after the legislature adjourns, they have 90 days to collect signatures to about 86,000 to put that legislation to voters, to ask as a voter referendum. They're pretty confident they can get those signatures in 90 days. What that would do is put the entire, if they do get enough signatures, that puts the whole law on hold until the next general election, which is a year from November of 2014. That's a prospect that Medicaid supporters are frankly pretty frightened of. I mean, it's not something, it throws everything sort of, well, puts a pause on everything, but throws a lot of things into chaos. And so there is some thinking that if there's going to be a referendum on the ballot, on the legislation, if it does get passed, and it looks like there's votes in the House to pass it, if the governor signs it, and then these guys get it on a general election ballot, some people are arguing, gee, you might as well go ahead and have a special election. If you're going to have one anyway, might as well have it sooner rather than later, and go ahead and put the whole thing on a special election, a constitutional amendment this coming November. So I think that there haven't been formal conversations, but the governor's office is sort of doing a little preemptive strike and has sent to the media their legal opinion that the whole thing is not referable. You cannot send, under the Constitution, appropriation items are not something that voters can decide to undo. In the governor's office believes that this Medicaid expansion would be an appropriations item, would be like a budget item, and so therefore not referable. That's a question. So we'll end up in court one way or the other. This whole thing ends up in court. It's just a question of when, which court, what issue. But it is, I think, it's given a little more steam, perhaps, or a little more consideration to the idea of putting Medicaid expansion on a special election ballot this coming fall.
Let's go back to what's going on in the House just for a minute, and we have about a minute remaining. There is a strategy about which way it goes, either to appropriations or to health care, to the Health Committee. If it goes to Health, the head of that committee, Heather Carter, is a proponent of expansion. And in the Appropriations Committee, there are a number of members, including the chair, John Kavanaugh, who opposes it. So one path would be smoother, the other a lot tougher for it. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. And, you know, some people argue that what difference does it make? It goes to appropriations. Kavanaugh gets to have a hearing, strip off the Medicaid expansion from the bill, strip off other things, other items that the Senate put on that he doesn't like, send it to the floor. The supporters of Medicaid expansion put all that stuff back on again. They vote it out. It would seem a smoother track, as you say, to send it through Health, not have to strip that stuff off and put it back on again. I think the Health Committee clearly is a friendlier committee than the Appropriations Committee, so it might be a smoother ride through there to the floor of the House. So it just remains to be seen. And it's up to the Speaker, of course. He assigns bills to committee, so it's entirely up to him what he decides to do with this.
I have to stop you there, Mary Kay. We're out of time. Unfortunately, I have to stop you there. Mary Kay Reinhart of the Arizona Republic. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael.
The governor's other big policy change, sales tax reform, has been no less daunting for legislators and for Arizona's cities and towns, which say they may lose revenue just as the recovery from the recession revs up. For their perspective, here's Ken Strobeck, Executive Director of the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. How are Arizona municipalities doing financially these days?
They're doing better than they did last year and a little better than they did the year before, but it's a very slow recovery from the very, very deep recession. And even today, we are still not close to where we were at the heyday of the early 2000s. You know, I think around 2007, 2008 was kind of the peak, and Then we had the big drop-off, an average of about 30% statewide on municipal budgets, and we're slowly recovering, but certainly not back to where we were.
Any notion of how much of a recovery there's been percentage-wise from that down 30%?
You know, I don't have that specific number on an average statewide. It obviously is different from, you know, one city to another depending on where they were to begin with. The ones that had the fast-growing areas in them, especially with home building, were the ones that took the deepest plunge off the cliff and are the ones that are have been the slowest to recover, but even there, some of the suburban areas in Maricopa County are starting to see quite a rapid pickup in home building again. So, you know, things are starting to return to normal.
And most cities and towns in the state are in the midst of preparing and passing their budgets for the coming fiscal year, which starts July 1st. What are you hearing about that process? Are people still holding back? Are they waiting to see what the legislature does?
There are some cities that have, you know, made some additions to their budget based on revenue projections and what they're seeing locally, and you know, they've restored some salary increases and things like that, but on a very modest scale. And again, many of them went through significant layoffs when the recession was at its peak, and they have not hired back to the level that they were before. They are, however, very concerned about some bills going through the legislature, most specifically the TPT reform bill and what the impact might be on city budgets.
Let's talk a little bit about the TPT, or the transaction privilege tax, as it's known, sales tax to the average person. The governor wants it reformed. She wants it simplified. The league and its members have been very vocal about that. Where do you stand on what's going on with that?
Well, first of all, we participated in the task force that was appointed last year that met for months during the summer on the simplification of the TPT system in Arizona. And our mayors came out early on in the session and said, we support simplification. Don't get the idea that there's one side that wants things to be simpler and the other side that doesn't. That is not the case. We support simplification. But we support reasonable simplification that actually is better for the business climate and for local governments and the state government. And there are many things that we can do to make that happen. So this bill that you're talking about, currently House Bill 2111, has a lot of moving parts and many different scenarios and proposals even for those various moving parts. So it's hard to know where it is on any one particular day.
The governor has made this one of her 2 or 3 key issues for this current legislative session. Does that mean that some form of it will be passed in the legislature?
I think it's more likely than not that something will be passed, and like I said, we support that. And in fact, we negotiated for months and months with the governor's office on these matters, and we came to agreement on 2 of the 3 of the big issues, the issue of auditing and the issue of collections. And the one where we still don't have agreement is the prime contracting, and that's the one where I think most members of the legislature have the most disagreement. If you go over and talk to them, most of them say, well, we should do those 2 things that the negotiators agreed on, but I have either a different idea on prime contracting or we should just take that out entirely.
And the prime contracting is a complex part of this process, and I'm not sure we have the time to explain it right here.
Well, under the current system, prime contracting is taxed on 65% of what the total contract is, whether you are building a new house or whether you're doing repairs or remodeling. And part of the proposal in this bill is to split that system, to continue the prime contracting on new construction, but to make it different on the tradespeople, or what we call service contractors, the HVAC and the electrical people and the plumbing folks and things like that. And that would be to go purely to a materials sales tax. And the question is whether that's paid where they buy materials or whether they use materials at the point of the job site or the point of purchase.
And the league's position on whether it's at point of purchase or point of use is?
We strongly believe that the point of use is a much better alternative and is actually simpler and The problem with that is if you go to just materials only, that's a significant tax reduction from what those service contractors are currently paying, because right now they're paying 65% of their total billing. The estimate is that their average use of materials is 21%. So that's a very significant tax reduction, and most of that falls on cities, because if they buy materials or they use materials even at the job site, the state still collects their sales tax regardless of where it happens, but the cities don't necessarily collect that, especially if it's done at the point of sale rather than at the job site. And so the latest JLBC estimate of the impact of this shows the state making money, the counties making money, cities and towns losing money.
A lot of money?
Their estimate is anywhere from $6 to $20 million.
Spread over the whole
Spread over
state,
the whole
over
state.
91 municipalities.
Right.
So it's a relatively small loss, and then that's something that the municipalities are willing to undergo for other things in the bill?
We have offered an alternative, which is to take one of the discussion points that came out in the simplification task force, which is to share the use tax that the state collects with cities and towns and counties, just the way they do with retail tax and other kinds of taxes. Currently, the use tax is in the distribution formula, but its rate is zero. So nothing goes to cities and towns. So we've said, look, as a make-whole, let's have the use tax be part of the shared revenue system that would soften that projected loss. And that has been rejected by governor's office, by legislators. The majority of legislators have said, no, we're just not going to do that.
So is that a non-starter for you then? Does that mean you'd withdraw any support for passage of this?
We believe that it's better to get agreement on what we have agreement on, which is the issue of auditing and the issue of collections. And we've got some very, very significant changes that really makes the system much simpler for businesses, and we think we should move forward on that. The other part of those two elements is it makes us in compliance with the standards of the Federal Marketplace Fairness Act. Should that be passed, then Arizona would be positioned to be able to start collecting sales taxes on internet sales. We think that's very important. And we're saying, let's go with what we have agreement on and just take off the prime contracting and any other variation of that right now, because that really isn't simplification this year.
House Ways and Means Committee Chair Debbie Lesko has led the legislative push for sales tax reform. Here's how she sees it going. Tell us the status of House Bill 2111, the TPT sales tax reform bill.
We're in really good shape. It's over in the Senate. I have the votes in both the House and the Senate, and now it's just a matter of timing based on what the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, when they want to move the bill.
The Senate passed its budget a couple of weeks ago, and the budget includes the provision for 2111 taking effect. Is that not correct? So is that a good sign?
I believe their budget included a fiscal note in their budget for 2111, but 2111 is going to change with a Senator Steve Yarborough amendment. And then the new fiscal impact actually helps a little bit the state general fund. So our Joint Legislative Budget Committee has predicted that it's possible that my bill will increase the state general fund by $1.3 million to $36.6 million, and that's because there's a belief that the current system, tax system, there's a lot of cheating going on. And so we're going to tie that up a little bit, or I should say, make sure that not so much cheating and non-compliance goes on, because we're changing part of it to you pay for taxes on materials.
Do you think that the cheating, as you call it, a lot of that has to do with the complexity and the confusion of it, perhaps? Is it really cheating, or is some of it just people don't understand how they're supposed to comply?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a combination. They call it non-compliance, but that includes people that just, it is so complex right now. 46 other states already do what my original bill was supposed to do. We are one of the most complicated states in the entire nation on how we force businesses to pay the taxes they owe us, and it's really ridiculous. So a lot of businesses, whether they're small or large, just don't know who they're supposed to pay the taxes to and how much. And so we're going to get that fixed with this bill, And also there are, quite frankly, some people that cheat the system because there's cash deals going on and that type of thing, and they don't pay any taxes at all right now.
Do you think that the bill that will, as it is now, satisfies the concerns that municipalities have expressed about having control over their sales tax revenues?
I think the bill as it stands now with the Yarborough floor amendment really alleviates a lot of the concerns of the cities. I've had so many meetings with the cities and stakeholders on this bill, and we've really conceded a lot to the cities. They had some legitimate concerns, and I believe we addressed them.
Now, they came up with a new proposal just last week regarding how the contractor sales tax revenues are split out. Is that going to make the final version, do you think?
I think what you're talking about is they wanted in their city shared revenue fund, which is a pot of state money, they currently don't get any use tax shared with them, and they wanted use tax shared with them, and quite frankly, no, we cannot put that in the bill because it would hurt the state general fund by $86 million. So no, we just cannot consider that.
Now, you told me off camera that you have a majority votes in both houses to pass this.
Yes, and bipartisan as well.
And you want to get more.
I do, because this is a good bill. It's a great bill. It helps small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, and these are the people that are providing the jobs and driving our economy, and we need to help them.
What are the keys to overcoming opposition to get even more votes for it?
I'm just going one-to-one talking to legislators about what the factors are. They're asking me questions, I'm sharing answers, and as more and more people understand this, I think they'll be on board. I mean, I have lived and breathed this legislation for, since January now. And so a lot of these people in the legislature, this isn't their main issue. They haven't been in all the meetings, so they need to understand it better. So it's just simply a matter of going one-to-one and explaining it to them.
This originated from the governor's office.
It did.
Is the governor satisfied that the final bill will have the things in it that she feels are needed to drive business in the state?
She is. I mean, both of us wanted the bill in its original version, but the cities had concerns. We made some major concessions to the cities, and so we are where we are now. But both of us are pleased, and we've addressed a lot of the city's concerns.
Now, a conversation with Tucson City Manager Richard Mianda for his views on city finances and the potential effects of sales tax reform. Welcome, Mr. Mianda.
Thank you, Mike, for having me here.
What's the status right now of city finance and the budget?
Well, we started the construction of the budget back in October, November, and the goal of the budget was to keep services at the optimum levels that we've had over the past year. We've had some financial issues that we've had to deal with, primarily with the cost of providing those services. But at the same time, revenues have increased about 4%. So at the end, the general fund budget is somewhere around $466 million, which is about an $18 million increase over last year's budget. But that's primarily for cost of services, benefits, and personnel issues. But I think that the state of the issues that we have to deal with are with the structural deficits that we're going to be facing in the future. Along with that, we have some issues that we have to rectify that deal with transit operations, personnel costs, as I mentioned before, and then we have some other issues in public safety that have to deal with in terms of pensions. So we have some issues that we're going to have to deal with in terms of strategic planning. But I think with a forecast of strategies and work with the mayor and council, we'll be able to get through those in the years 15 and 16.
So as far as basic public services go, we're staying pretty much the same, adding a few things here and there?
Well, again, the goal and the mission of the budget for this year was to keep services at the optimal levels that we had last year. So we don't have any cuts. You might see some service reductions in terms of response times and those kinds of things that go along with service demands, but in terms of the budget, there were no cuts.
Let's talk a little bit about state sales tax reform proposals, which will have an impact on cities, as we've learned earlier in the program. First of all, the city of Tucson collects a 2% sales tax on top of what the state collects. and you get about 187, 188 million, about 40% of your general fund budget from that. That won't be affected by what's going on at the state level, is that correct?
No, that won't be affected in terms of the sales tax. What we're taking a look at is some of the issues that are coming through legislative that could affect our overall budget locally.
And from the state, you get about $58 million projected for the next fiscal year in state shared sales taxes. But there's a possibility that that could change one way or another. What contingencies have you built in to protect yourselves for that?
Well, what we've taken a look at is what the cost of those issues might be, and we've estimated it to be somewhere between $2, $4, or $5 million. We don't have the exact number because it's dependent on when it's enacted and what the corollary issues that are going to be infused into that legislation. Our plan is to take a look at the legislation when it passes or if it passes and redefine what we're going to do in terms of those expenditures in the early fall.
Now, there are 18 cities in Arizona, and Tucson's included, mostly they're the bigger cities in the state, that do their own tax collecting and their own auditing. And I assume that's a system that works well for the city of Tucson, correct?
Well, over the last year, we've taken a major step in terms of audit and examination of our tax collections. And with that, we've seen increases in our revenues that impact us locally to the positive. With this legislation, there's question as to that audit function and how it's going to be done. And quite frankly, if it's taken away from us, I think it will impact us negatively locally.
And it also would mean a reduction in staffing, perhaps, because you wouldn't need as many auditors if the state's doing it?
Well, I think we'll have to examine that. I think that issues that happen here locally with local sales tax require an examination of those revenues, and the audit function needs to stay strong. But with the decline in revenues and expenditures that are associated with that, we're going to have to take a look at staffing because it's going to impact us, maybe to the positive, because it might mean more work for us with having to transfer and communicate more with the state in terms of what we're collecting or what they're collecting. It might require us to add additional people. We just don't know yet.
We've heard from the representative of the League of Arizona Cities and Towns that the cities are worried about what the impact will be on them, especially the loss of control, where they've had a lot of control over collecting and auditing for businesses. Do you share those worries?
I think we are in with that platform of decision making that if local control is taken away, we won't get to see what is coming in and we won't get to see what's going out. So I think that the auditing function and the examination of that is a primary component that we have to be forecasting for and have focus on.
City Manager Richard Mianda, City of Tucson, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Mike.
Speaking of sales taxes, the temporary 1-cent education sales tax expires at midnight. Read about it and all the issues of sales tax reform on our website, azpm.org. That's our program for Friday, May 31st, 2013. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.